Lawyers of Reddit. At what point when working for a defendant did you realize my client is a monster? Story 1. I had a client who was accused of domestic violence. Essentially, he threw his girlfriend out of a second-story window. Now, he's got a terrible history, but so do a lot of my clients, and his attitude is a little entitled, also typical. But he also knows the deal and wants a plea deal, so I'm not really prepared when he absolutely refuses the no jail offer from the state. Keep in mind, there were like 5 witnesses. Why? Because they wanted him to pay for her medical bills. Okay, a jerk, but not the worst. What did it though was his counter offer. I ain't paying that girl's bills. Tell them I'll pay for the window. Prosecutor was not happy. We now have a Discord. Check out the server in the link in the description. Story 2. Criminal defense lawyer. I can name a few instances where I was just absolutely disgusted with my client. Caveat, these are mostly years ago when I was taking just any old case. I mostly practice white collar and federal now. 1. I won a DUI case because the government messed up on something right before trial was to begin. My client gives me a hug and completely reeks of alcohol. He had driven to court. I took his keys and called his mother. 2. Client who was accused of touching a 12-year-old. He was mid-40s at the time and I had to shut him down real quick when he tried to tell me how the 12-year-old was coming on to him. 3. I represented a woman for a grand theft charge. Left her in my office to get some things copied before she left. After she left, I realized my sunglasses and car keys were stolen. I tracked her down in the lobby and told her I was not going to represent her anymore and I would call the police if she didn't empty her pockets in front of me and give me my things. 4. I had a client who was released after 25 years in prison for murder, and then the same day he beats up his prospective new landlord. He ended up getting another 10 years. He was unrepentant and laughed about how he hit the guy so hard his eyeball popped out. I thought to myself that this guy deserves to be in prison. Took the case to trial anyway and, shocker, lost, and he got 10 years, the max. 5. Client who pretended to be a doctor so he could sell steroids. According to the government, he had numerous clients who were made to believe that his steroids would cure their cancer. They paid him hundreds of thousands of dollars, and some of them died. I just thought that was pure evil. That went from funny to sad real fast. Like, people doing the crime that they are being tried for is funny. That last one, scamming critically ill people, that's just awful. Story 3. I've done a lot of prison legal aid, and I could tell stories about child touchers that would turn you green. But instead, I'll turn you green in a different way. I had a kid, 17, who was mildly cognitively disabled, due to brain trauma he sustained at the hands of his birth parents, who ended up with a really wonderful foster care family and thrived. He was a popular kid in school, good athlete, got a girlfriend, and invited her to meet up and be teenagers one night in a corn silo, which I guess is a thing that country kids do? I don't know. This all comes from the pre-sentence investigation report I read before taking his case. But this girl met him at the silo and they were hanging out. By his account, they were having a nice time and he was really enjoying himself. Then, for no particular reason, he picked up a 2x4 and bashed her skull in. He then used a combination of very crude farm implements, shovels, hoes, to chop her body up and bury it in the corn, and went home like nothing had happened. Story 4. I had a teacher in high school who was a former lawyer. We always asked him why he gave up his practice to start teaching. He finally caved and explained that his last case was the defense of 3 people. Apparently there had been a 4th. It was 2 couples, who, in the act of a drunken, drugged-out orgy, decided to unalive, partially eat, and dismember one of the women. I guess it seemed like a good idea at the time. As a lawyer, he said it was pretty open and shut, but he had to get his clients the best results possible, and he was exposed to all the horrid details, the pictures, and their reasoning. My teacher had such a far-off look when he explained it that we could see it really got to him. Story 5. We had a client try and enforce a post-employment restraint against a 19-year-old receptionist after she quit and started working for a competitor. The reason? He wanted to make her life hell because she wouldn't sleep with him, a creepy 57-year-old man. Him trying to sleep with her was the reason she quit. Unsurprisingly, he didn't take our advice to discontinue his claim, and so we ended up sending him somewhere else. Story 6. The first week I started at my current criminal defense firm, I was tasked with cataloging discovery from our client's phone. The phone had multiple, talking around 4,000 videos, photos, text exchanges with women under 16. Though not all of the girls' ages were confirmed, most, if not all, were under the legal age of consent consent and many were barely pubescent. They were naked and being intimately sold for over a year. He would lure these girls in exchange for drugs. Nothing felt totally bizarre until I came across one video where he was clearly forcing himself upon a literal child, who was so high on benzos, not willingly but rather forced, and choking her in the process. When our firm confronted him, he said he was in love with her and that's why he did it. He would also take these girls to hotels and make them bang one another while he taped, but nothing beat what I said above. Pretty horrifying stuff for my first week on the job. Story 7. Lifelong criminal defense lawyer here. To be completely honest, it's not about the offense, but about the person. I've had people accused of murder that I kind of really liked and thought well of. I've had people accused of shoplifting who've given me the heebie-jeebies and seemed like psychopaths. Speaking from purely a criminal standpoint, having a client who is a monster doesn't matter in terms of your duty to them. All it does is make the job less pleasant. My worst clients have been people who are comfortable scamming others of their money. Story 8. Had a divorce client, husband and father, who disowned his autistic son. Tried to argue that he should get all of his wife's retirement having not worked for 12 years. Contacted me during the height of Hurricane Sandy. He was in the Bronx and me in Manhattan, saying that he wanted to hold his wife in contempt for not paying him that day, while the storm slammed NYC. Told me that I was making a huge mistake getting married. My wedding date was November 3rd, 4 days after Sandy, saying that I was going to be miserable and regret it. I could go on. But the worst was when, several months later, since his divorce was taking a long time, he sent death threats to myself and my wife, saying that he had hired an executioner to unalive the two of us if his divorce wasn't finalized in 60 days. Called the police and they said he left his premises one day earlier. I heard nothing from him until February 2014, when he emailed me saying he needed a winter coat from his wife and could I help get it for him. Ironically, the divorce didn't have to be completed because he unalived himself before the judge signed the judgment of divorce. Story 9. I'm a lawyer for people on death row. Although some of my clients have been convicted of horrible, sometimes nightmare-inducing crimes, I honestly have never had the thought, oh, this person is a monster. What I am far more likely to think is, 1. How do I convince my child to never try meth because psychosis is real and horrifying? Or 2. I am so lucky to have been born into a family where my parents weren't violent, /drug addicted, /mentally ill, all of the above. Or 3. Jesus Christ, how differently things may have turned out if my client had access to mental health services on the outside. Or 4. Wow, this person who is completely dysfunctional on the outside has adapted really, really well to the structure that an institutional environment provides. Perhaps it's due to my own religious beliefs and my analytical nature, but the idea that some people are just bad or monsters has never rung true to me, nor has it been born out of my observed experience. Story 10. My mom is a lawyer. This is the story about how she quit being a public defender. When you are a public defender, you don't get to choose your cases. She got assigned a young man who, with the help of his girlfriend, had gotten a kitten from a free to a good home ad in the paper. Then they brought it home and gave it to their dog as a chew toy. I think they also filmed it. So, yeah. She said she needed a shower after every meeting with him. Canceled her public defender contract after the case concluded. Yeah, hardcore animal abuse is like one of the huge signifiers of someone who's going to go on to become a murderer and stuff. It is like textbook psychopathic behavior. Story 11. A lot of years ago, I used to work as a solicitor's representative. Cases go to Crown Court, barrister deals, and I am there for paperwork, as well as additional stuff with client, etc. 70-something-year-old man had been in jail for 15 years for an assault on a child. Solicitor and barrister working on getting him released due to him getting clean reports from just about everyone. Guards took him out of jail to a dentist, and as he entered the waiting room, he saw 2 children and ran straight at them. Guards had to stop him. 3 weeks later at court, I was the one that sat him down in a room to explain that, no, this isn't a hearing to release you, it is so you can be committed to a mental health secure facility for the rest of your life. He didn't take that too well. I shed no tears. Story 12. I got arrested when I was younger and wound up in county jail for a bit. When you first get transferred there from the police station holding, you end up seeing a judge who sets your bail. The whole thing is done from the inside of a jail and through a TV screen, so you never see the judge or your public defendant in person. It was my first time doing this whole thing, and I was sticking nearby this guy that went by Repo, who had been in and out of jail before. We're waiting for our turn in front of the judge, and there's this kid ahead of us. They really didn't care much about privacy, so you could hear the whole thing if you were next in line. This kid was barely 18 years old, just like a week over, and he had a rap sheet that was extremely long. They get to the current charge that he was in there for, which was allegedly smacking a brick over the head of an elderly man and robbing him. I was very surprised by that, but I was even more surprised at how Repo reacted to this. Even though he had been in and out of the system for all sorts of crimes and had met a ton of other criminals, something like that was over the top, even for him, especially since this kid was so young. It's pretty sad to think that this kid's life was already that messed up at such a young age, and was probably just going to get worse from there. Story 13. Not a defendant, but a divorce. Client is a late 30s woman, 2 kids, idyllic suburban life with her incredibly lucrative medical profession, husband. He caught her cheating. He wanted to patch things up. She decided on a divorce. So far, nothing out of the ordinary, unfortunately. Then I start getting details. He caught her on his birthday in their bed while the kids were downstairs. The husband decided to come home early as a surprise, and his wife was getting taken to Pound Town by a 19-year-old. But wait, there's more. Really fun stuff from the husband. Guy had been treated for gonorrhea twice, and both times he had caught it, it was from his wife. The second kid wasn't his. It was obvious because the child was 100% some race and the dad was not. Bad stuff, right? Well, enter the texts, emails, etc. She was carrying on like a dozen affairs at any given time, spanning years. She would bring them home and tell the kids that they were electricians, plumbers, etc. She'd bang other guys within minutes of dropping her kids off at school. I've met some awful people in my time, but this woman straight up told me how much this guy loved her and how she manipulated the crap out of him. He knew about a lot of this stuff, and each time he found out something new, he just tried to win her back. I don't want to go into the details of what happened, but some money that you get, you really don't want. Story 14. Civil defense here, so maybe not as juicy as the crime defense folks. Some of the work I do is employment defense, particularly sexual/age harassment/discrimination cases. I'm pretty cynical and see a lot of cases where plaintiffs are full of crap, particularly in harassment/discrimination cases. In one case, I was defending a company, and that company's manager jointly. The manager seemed like a straight-up guy, and I pride myself in being a good judge of character. I was pretty convinced the case was just payback from a disgruntled employee. To my credit, the plaintiff, a 38-year-old female, was a really poor employee by all accounts. Still, it didn't prepare me for what I found doing a review of every email the company had stored on their servers. Not only did this guy stick his hand down this woman's shirt without consent, when she threatened to go to HR, he said he would fire her and make sure she would never get a job again. The lady was a single mother with 3 kids. He also propositioned her for banging in exchange for a day off. He thought that the email had been wiped because the company had a 1-year retention policy. Apparently, some of the company's older emails remained on a server before the policy was put in place because of the migration of the emails from an older outsourced IT company. I had to substitute out of the case thereafter for conflict reasons since my 2 clients' interests were no longer aligned. Story 15. I could have gotten my client off on a technicality. He was already serving 10 years for armed robbery when another case came up of gang assault. I went to check the case file and saw that they had a muck of gathering evidence and blood samples. The detective said he was just going to archives and pointedly left the file out. I read the woman's account of her 14 known assailants from her home village, including my client. I dropped the case then and there. He died in a gang initiation in prison shortly after, but he was apparently one of the kingpins. Sometimes you have to know when to fold 'em. I really hope there wasn't a lawyer who was like, oh yes, this case is excellent. This client I can identify with. I do hope that it was just someone begrudgingly like, oh, I have to take this for whatever reason. Because the last thing I want is a lawyer who's just as sick as these people. But I'm sure it happens. Story 16. Not a lawyer, but work for a law firm as an investigator. One of our clients stabbed an ex-lover multiple times over $100. Perp then ran out of the house all bloody. Neighbor and her teenage daughter see him covered in blood and rush inside to see if they can help while they call 911. Victim is still alive. On the 911 call the daughter made, you can hear the mom singing Amazing Grace while she tried to stop the bleeding. You can also hear the victim with a stab wound in her neck gurgling on blood while she tries to sing along. The EMTs arrived in under 3 minutes, but it took the police 19 minutes from the call to show up to clear the scene for them. She lived for 17 minutes. I saw the photos of the scene with the body still in place. It looked like a scene straight from Dexter. Story 17. My girlfriend was on the jury for a capital murder charge. He brutally assaulted and murdered a young mother and attempted to do the same to her toddler, who somehow, miraculously, or not, depending on how you look at it, survived. The son grew up and was about 14 by the time that this case was brought forward to determine if the death penalty would be used. Obviously, the killer had already been in prison, was found guilty long ago. Or if he would avoid the death penalty and just spend 3 life sentences in prison. He had originally attacked several women before this incident and sent 2 to the hospital, but was released with a slap on the wrist after serving minimal jail time. The murder was preventable, but leniency let this violent man back out on the streets. What is sad is that every single witness for the defense was a member of his family, and every single one of them was caught lying under oath, even over the most inconsequential things. It's as if the whole family, mother, father, brothers, and sisters, were all physically incapable of saying anything truthful. None of them even showed any sympathy for the victims or even acknowledged that the assault and murder are wrong. The guy who did it showed no remorse either. What was really chilling, however, was the fact that every woman that he attacked looked strikingly similar to my girlfriend, and he stared at her with a blank expression almost the entire time. It really freaked her out, and she still has nightmares about it. Story 18. Like always, not the answer to the specific question, but I doubt you're gonna have legitimate lawyers perusing Reddit and telling you about their cases. Seems like a very fine line of confidentiality to walk to tell internet strangers about things that happened in the courtroom. So I'll give my story. My ex-aunt has been through about 10 lawyer teams in what's going on to an 8-year lasting custody battle. And we're not exactly in a place where there are that many lawyers. Her last and final group, she literally had to hire from another state, because word had gotten out in the legal community to not ruin your career associating with this woman. She has filed every CPS/CYS type of injunction, accusing our entire family of assault and touching kids to draw this out as long as possible. On my side, the one case that got brought up in court was that I had assaulted my then what would have been 8-year-old cousin while I was actually studying abroad, literally on the exact opposite side of the planet. Obviously, CYS can't just ignore a claim like that. But when it finally got to a judge after these accusations, he realized, wait, this kid wasn't within 1,000 miles of the child in about a year from when this supposedly happened. He brought her and her then lawyer up with contempt charges. I'm just vaguely describing it all. It gets way deeper and more screwed up. Thankfully, once a kid is 14, they get way more rights as far as court proceedings go, so he can finally tell the judge he wants nothing to do with his mom unless it's by his terms. I can't imagine being such a painful client that lawyers refuse to work with me. Like, that's impressive. This woman is a whole new level of awful. Story 19. Not a lawyer, but I worked in a federal prison. Several inmates come to mind, but the one I'll tell you is about a former Catholic priest. He'd given up his vocation years before, but he got caught up in an underage content sting. At that time, sentencing was based on how many images a suspect had. He had thousands and was facing a maximum of 40 years. The guy was in his 50s, so that would have essentially been a genuine life sentence, since federal inmates can only earn 15% good time. At his sentencing hearing, and I read the transcript so I know this is a fact, he told the judge that when he was a priest, he had touched hundreds of young boys. Despite treatment and his own remorse, he felt completely incapable of stopping his obsession. He had not ever been charged with these crimes, but he felt guilty enough to admit them, and then asked the judge to impose the full penalty, so he would be locked up for the rest of his life. This man needed some serious therapy. It's hard to say because people who feel these kinds of things often won't tell people about them so they can't get treatment for them, right? Of course, there's the whole thing of like, just don't do it, which, yeah, so true. But still, it's not like there are a bunch of support systems out there and people never want to come forward with this kind of thing. So yeah, this sounds like a poor guy who also, like, did terrible things. But maybe if there were systems in place, it wouldn't have happened? It's hard to say.